I'm Chad Van Dixhorn. I'm a professor of church history at Westminster Theological Seminary in Philadelphia. So I wear two hats. I'm teaching all of church history, and so that's a great joy in itself. And I'm also the director of a study center on the Westminster Assembly and its texts called the Craig Center for the study of the Westminster Standards. So the Westminster Assembly was a gathering of ministers with some lay observers that met during the 1640s in the middle of a chaotic civil war. And politically, their purpose was to try and make peace in the Church of England. The results, however, were significant for the Church of England for a little while, which became Presbyterian for a few years, and then long-term for the Presbyterian Church in Scotland, for the Church of Scotland, Ireland, and then through missionary activity around the world. They ended up writing about 140 documents, some of which have become sort of the standard expressions of the Reformed faith in English around the world. So used nominally or thoughtfully by about 35 million Protestants. And then knockoff editions, adjusted versions for Congregationalists and Baptists and so on, are also used, more fully expanding the circle of people who use these summaries of Christian doctrine. You know. So the Westminster Assembly gives you about 120 ministers, all thinking together about every aspect of church life, worship, government, and so on. It's this wonderful moment where people are, from the scriptures, building a Reformed church from the ground up. So it's a really unique gathering, and then it has unique records that give you the behind-the-scenes conversations. So as a moment of church history, it's more instructive than most other moments of church history in that way. And you know, church history gives us a lens on our own practices. It's like the poor man's travel guide. It allows you to visit another place in time, and does the same thing that maybe ministering somewhere else will do. It kind of gives you a new perspective. So that's a long answer, and I'm not even quite done. I actually think there's value not just in church history in the Westminster Assembly, but there's actually value in studying and using older texts and not just newer ones. I mean, the nice thing about a kind of 10-point statement of faith found on a website is that it's fresh and hits the main points. But it can give the impression that Christianity was invented last Tuesday. And so the good thing about a confessional text is that it unites us to many other Christians using the same text in a way that a brand new one wouldn't. So it captures the breadth of the church. It also captures some of its depth. You know, people have been using this for a while because it really does kind of hit the main points. So I don't apologize for an older confession. I actually think it's really helpful for us. Well, there's a funky reason why I want to talk about Luther, and that is, although we celebrate 1517, I think Luther really comes to his gospel breakthrough in the spring of 1518. So I want to make that point, I suppose. But I also just set for myself this little project. What did Luther know in the first year? October 31st to October 31st. And, you know, what year is it? I just got off an airplane. It is 2018, so we're still in that year, and so I'm still kind of, you know, thinking through Luther's first year in the 500th and 501st anniversary of the Reformation, but also Luther's first year as a reformer, if you will, is just so fascinating. It gives us so many insights into the gospel, the Christian life, and the way in which God treats his people and leads his people. I just find it so edifying and encouraging that I wanted to share it with others. So God's Ambassadors, I originally thought about writing a trilogy, God's Ambassadors, on the Westminster Assembly's pulpit theology. Why preach? How to do it? What should a preachers and preaching. And then the next book was going to be God's Shepherds, church leadership, government discipline. Kind of hard questions, but really important. The Bible really does teach a model for biblical church government. And being familiar with that, being able to sort of give an answer as to why we're Presbyterians. Someone sort of shook you awake at 2 a.m. And asked for 5 points of Presbyterianism. That's all. I want to cover why Presbyterianism works, why it's important, why it's biblical. And then the third book that I dreamed of writing was called God's Shepherds on pastoral theology. I think I'm just going to stick to the one, God's Ambassadors, and the others will appear in articles. The Assembly had it had a core mission for pastoral care that I think is important. How do we respond to sin and suffering? So I want to talk about that too. And in all of that, I think we'll see the work, not just of the pastorate, but of elders and deacons kind of coming into play. So I really look forward to the conversations and the time with people thinking about that on Saturday. I think it's really helpful to try and read it in bite-sized chunks. Maybe read a couple paragraphs or a chapter. It starts off with a long chapter, so which can be kind of daunting. But reading a few paragraphs at a time, just thinking about it, and kind of making your way through. You could, there's 33 chapters. You can do it in a month. It's just kind of a nice way of approaching it. This is an attempt to summarize what the Bible teaches about key topics. A couple of which we might not think about as key topics, but they really are. The communion of the saints. It's not just enough to have a good doctrine of the church. You have to have a good doctrine of the Christian family. Church-state relations. It's got a few chapters that are surprises, but it's a great way of thinking in an orderly way about the Christian faith. And if the older English, which I think is helpful for ministers and students to be able to read, because so much of our learning is in older English. But if that's too daunting for some people, in my book and other places, I have parallel texts of the original and then a modern English version. For what it's worth, this could sound shamelessly promotional, but I did write Confessing the Faith as a guide to the Westminster Confession, trying to show how the doctrines taught there arise from the Scriptures and are not imposed on the Scriptures. And then my wife came up with a helpful study guide published by Banner of Truth that asks questions that capture the three main purposes of the book, which is what doctrine's taught, where's it come from in the Bible, and how's this relevant for the Christian life, for our prayer life, for the way in which we think and speak about God. So I'm hoping that the class next week, or exposure to the confession, or reading these books would be helpful to people. You know.